Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. We are your co-hosts, Stephanie Weidel and Demis. Today, we are honored to speak with Marcus Thornton, founder of Feds for Freedom. We will delve into his background and the influences that caused him to question the given narratives. We will hear the objections he formulated to push back, as well as his strategy to act swiftly and coordinate with like-minded federal employees. We will talk about what Marcus witnessed in our government over the past couple of years, how it impacts the freedoms of all Americans, and what you can do about it. Marcus has been a political officer with the Department of State since 2016 and has previously served in both the Border Patrol and the Department of Homeland Security. He has been in federal service for 16 years. He is a recipient of 3 meritorious honor awards for his defending human rights, rescuing victims of human trafficking and religious persecution, and advancing national security issues. Welcome, Marcus. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephanie, Demis. It's good to be here today.
Marcus, could you start us off telling us a little bit about your history, where you grew up, what your family looked like, and your educational background?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest, God's country. Some people would call it flyover country, but I would disagree. You know, it's the heartland of the U.S. And I think that I grew up in a large family in a rural community. And, you know, as a young teen, I spent my summers working for the local farmers, helping them with all the stuff that had to be done around the farm, wheat harvest, you know, taking care of livestock. And I think all of that combined, you know, growing up in the Midwest, having those experiences, growing up in a farming culture, and then also as the oldest child in a large family, all of those, you know, combined to give me to instill in me a work ethic that really has carried with me to this day. And I have to give my parents credit for that as well, because they, you know, as I was growing up, that was something that they really focused on was, you know, character, not only with respect to work, but your entire, everything in your life, you know, your relationship with God, with others, and your work ethic. And so, yeah, that's, you know, I grew up more specifically in Kansas, kind of grew up all over the state, lived in a lot of different places. My dad had to move relatively frequently for work. And I think that's influenced me as well. You know, you look at the career path that I've chosen now in the Foreign Service. Every 2 or 3 years, you're forced to move to someplace new. But for me, that's nothing particularly unusual or stressful, because that's just how I grew up. But now it's a new country every couple of years instead of a new county. And yeah, so that's that's, you know, and then from there, education wise, I was homeschooled growing up, and which presented a little bit of a challenge when I reached the age to go to university, because at the time, homeschooling wasn't recognized in the way that it is today. And so I really had a difficult time getting into university, and faced a lot of discrimination in that process. And that, I think, was my first brush with pushing for political change, because when I tried to get into university, I had aced the college exams. I had, yeah, I'm not gonna. My scores were excellent. They were about as good as you could get. And despite that, and they were so good that I should have gotten full ride scholarships at the university of my choice. anywhere in the U.S. And despite that, I applied to a bunch of different universities, and every single one came back and said, "Thank you for your application. However, because you do not have a high school diploma from an accredited school, uh, unfortunately, either we can't consider your application or we need you to go through these programs for high school dropouts, culminating in receiving a GED before we can consider your application. And so we're going to need you to take, a few months to go through your community college or wherever, um, treat yourself like a high school dropout, and then come back and try again." And to me, that wasn't acceptable. I had already proven my academic abilities through the entrance exams.
Can I just interject something?
Yeah,
This is very interesting. I was also homeschooled and probably a couple years behind you. Um, uh, I don't recall any issue with high school diploma. I remember my parents putting together something very official, but maybe homeschooling parents join the HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense, because they provide support with high school diplomas for homeschooling individuals. But this is very interesting.
yeah,
The
and so a lot of and it may have depended on which universities you applied for, but I will say that the universities that I was applying for, mostly in the Midwest, um, did change their processes drastically uh, immediately after I applied. And so, um, I called an individual who I respected and had known growing up, who was also a homeschool parent who was serving in the Kansas Senate at the time. He immediately put me in touch with um, I can't recall if it was the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the Kansas House, one of the two. And I shared my story, and that person told me, "Look, as soon as I get off this call, I'm getting on the phone with the presidents of these universities you applied to. They will be changing their policies, or they won't get any state funding next year." Um,
wow.
so she did. She made those calls, and sure enough, 2 years later, when my brother was ready to apply for, at that point, I had sort of given up. I had moved on, but my brother, who was 2 years behind me, applied to some of those same universities and got full ride scholarships. Was accepted, no questions asked, because his scores also were, exceptional on the ACT. And so it's amazing how much things shifted just in that short window after what I had gone through. So that was my first experience with political activism, and recognizing that it just takes one person standing up, and doing the right thing, um, to make a difference.
Wow, that's incredible, Marcus. right,
So
right from
activism is not a bad thing, right?
No, no.
As long as
Okay,
it's
so
done
you
right.
And long story short, I did eventually finish my bachelor's degree, but in the process, I spent this time working in Homeland Security, joining the State Department, and serving overseas. And so I ended up not finishing my bachelor's degree. I actually entered the State Department as a diplomat, as a foreign service officer, with no university degree, which is almost unheard of, because all of my class, I would say probably 90% of my classmates had either a master's degree, or multiple master's degrees, or a PhD, or some sort of advanced university education. I was the only one without without even a bachelor's degree, and I have heard that it has been done at other times in State Department history, but it's very unusual.
Hey, don't feel bad, man. I only have a high school diploma.
Yeah, yeah. No, and there's nothing wrong with that. You too can be a foreign service officer in the State Department. Um, yeah, you don't, and I really support. Under in recent years, there have been efforts to shift from a focus on academic credentials in the government hiring process to a focus on skills and abilities, and experiences. And I wholeheartedly support that effort, because I believe there are a lot of people out there, especially who came from underrepresented communities like I do, who have the skills and abilities and the experiences to succeed in those positions without having the piece of paper from a university.
This is very interesting. You had obviously some critical thinking skills that brought you right into, and you went right from college, not finishing bachelor's, to DHS.
Yes, I did. Yeah, so I started my public service career, if you will, started as a with the local sheriff's department in a law enforcement capacity on a volunteer basis. I was a reserve deputy sheriff, and from there, I was able to get picked up by Homeland Security and worked in a number of different capacities for several years there. Uh, Mostly as a Border Patrol agent down on the border with Mexico, and then in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Um, did a lot of good work. Worked with some really great people, and I have. So going back to the question of the university education, do I regret not spending 4 years of my life going to class all day every day? Absolutely not, because the experiences that I gained during that time that I would have spent in the classroom were spent gaining real life experience. Were spent rescuing victims of human trafficking. Even when I was with DHS, this has been a theme that's been consistent throughout my career, is that I have always been in unique positions to help people who were either victims of human trafficking or victims of other human rights violations. And it's what I'm passionate about. It's what drives me to do what I do. And so, I spent several years with Homeland Security. Had a blast, and then ended up in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. But ultimately, I wanted to have, I wanted to be able to travel more in my career, to be able to serve my country not only domestically but also overseas. And the opportunity to do that is rare with Homeland Security. So I ended up taking the Foreign Service Officer test and got in as a political officer, and now here I am. I've served a number of different tours overseas, and then TDYs as well, temporary assignments. So my first overseas tour was in Brazil, and while I was there, I also did long-term temporary assignments to Argentina and India. As I was brought on to go serve in Brazil, I had formal training in Portuguese language, and then came on with Spanish language abilities already from being in the Border Patrol. And then from Brazil was assigned to Nigeria for 2 years. And then from Nigeria, I'm now in Central Asia for my current assignment, and went through Russian language training before I came here. So I'm fluent in 3 foreign languages now: Spanish at an intermediate level, and then Portuguese and Russian at an advanced or professional level.
How many years do you have in?
16 years of federal service total.
And were you always interested in languages? What languages did you study in your childhood?
I was, but I grew up at a time where we didn't have Rosetta Stone or Duolingo. Some of these modern tools that we have at our fingertips on our cell phones, I didn't have. And so, and I grew up in also a family that faced a lot of financial challenges. And so we didn't have the resources to, I know at the time there were like cassette tapes from, some of the different companies that you could buy, but they were expensive, and we didn't have those sort of resources. So I wasn't able to study foreign languages in high school.
Was Latin brought in?
Thank you. Yes. So I did. Those are. I did study a little bit of Latin. I spent a couple of months just learning it from a book. I never studied it under somebody who actually spoke the language, but I do have a little bit of book knowledge about Latin, as well as through studying the Bible, Greek and Hebrew. So.
Wow.
So yes, languages, I guess, have always been part of my interests.
Okay, so you started traveling a bit more. What did you love most about your time being part of Border Patrol at that point?
The ability to make an impact in other people's lives,
What
seeing that
what
the
years
work,
was it? Sorry to cut you off. What years was it when you were on Homeland Security while doing the Border Patrol stuff?
yeah, Homeland Security was 2000, and I started in 2007, and then in 2016 transferred over to the State Department.
Okay.
And it was the ability to make a difference in other people's lives and to help the helpless. And a lot of people go through their careers and wonder whether or not they ever made a difference. When I was with the Border Patrol, when I was with Homeland Security, I never had to ask myself that question because I was out there arresting violent convicted felons trying to come across the border, arresting, you know, drug smugglers with multiple convictions, arresting, people who are entering with bad intent. Maybe they had connections with certain organizations or people that would indicate that their intent would be less than honorable. And rescuing victims, rescuing people who were in human trafficking situations, who were subjected to some of the most unspeakable things and conditions that somebody could go through. And so I never had to ask myself whether or not I was making a difference because I could see the difference that I was making. And I knew, that I was being, placed into these situations where I could make a difference and I could put a stop to the things that these people were going through, or to in the case of taking people off the streets, arresting them at the border as they were trying to come in, keeping those people from coming into the U.S. and from harming Americans. Violent sex offenders. I arrested multiple violent sex offenders who were trying to come across, and who knows what they would have done once they were here. And these are, we're not talking about hypotheticals. These are people who were actually convicted, who did time for doing these crimes. And so, when people say, "Oh, the Border Patrol is just racist," they're trying, the only thing they're doing is hurting people that are trying to seek a better life for themselves, for their families. No, that's absolutely not true. The security of our borders is critical to our security as a country. And I'm just one Border Patrol agent, and these are the people that I was encountering. Multiply that by 15, 20,000 agents that are out there every day putting their lives on the line to keep Americans safe. There are a lot of bad people trying to come into our country and do bad things, and it's important that we stop those people.
So obviously, you went through tactical training to conduct all your activities as a Border Patrol officer, and the question here is, when you guys had orders, you guys had to follow the orders that came in. These orders came; they could have came from all the way from the White House, telling you, "Hey, this is who we're going to go after. This is who we're going to arrest, and this is who we're not going to arrest." Is that right? Is that how it worked? Or was it like a little bit lower level individuals making those decisions?
It was usually lower level control, but there were times when we would get taskings from much higher up.
Okay, I'm just trying to see how how that worked by itself, the DHL stuff, DHS stuff, because we constantly talking about corruption, and now we're seeing what's going on with our borders for the past 3 years. It's been hell. I mean,
Yeah.
no one's working there, obviously. So compared to where you were at that time to now, obviously you said you felt that you're making a change. Do you feel like all that work you put in as an officer now has gone down the drain and has no meaning for the agency that you served for that long?
Well, it's frustrating to see what's happening on our border, and it was frustrating at the time. Remember this was, I left in January of 2016, and so it was under primarily under the Obama administration that I was serving down on the border, and
Yeah.
speaking to the orders that we received and seeing how things were managed, um, there absolutely were things that were done to undermine the mission, and they were done deliberately to undermine the mission, to pad the statistics one way or the other, to manipulate the narrative around border security. And so,
And this is from within.
yes, yes,
This is where you
not
saw corruption.
yes, and I would say, what the corruption that I saw while serving in, the corruption, the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency that I saw while serving as a border patrol agent, didn't come from the rank and file members of the border patrol. Obviously, there is some of that. It's a proven fact statistic that in any given population, for every 100 individuals you have, there will be at least one or two who are not of good character. And unfortunately, the Border Patrol is not exempt from that. But the most egregious corruption that I saw came from very high level political appointees who would manipulate the way that statistics were reported in a way that would indicate that the border was more secure than it really was. And sorry. We'll have to have Victoria edit that out. And I'm not the only one that noticed it. Every time they would come out with some new policy that would fudge the statistics a little bit, or would adjust the timing of certain things in order to make it harder to do our jobs, a lot of agents would be very upset about it, because at the end of the day, they just want to do their jobs. They want to be able to go out and protect Americans and keep them safe. And there are definitely times when political appointees get in the way of that. And I think if you speak with the rank and file Border Patrol agents now, they would say that the situation is the same as it was back then. That there's a lot of dissatisfaction about how the border crisis is being managed, and that there needs to be drastic change if we're going to be able to keep Americans safe. And I think there's a lot of pieces going into that. There needs to be change. Some of those changes can only be made by Congress. But what needs to happen is we need to enforce the laws. We don't need new laws. I do think that our immigration system needs significant work. But most of the issues could be addressed if we just enforce the laws that are already on the book. Congress has already expressed their intent through these laws of what the American people want and need, and the partisan leaders who are within the Homeland Security structure now are not conducting their operations in a way that is reflective of those intents. So not completely unrelated to corruption, but like the most hair-raising moment I had in the Border Patrol. There were a lot. There were a few times that I had close calls. Let's put it that way. But I still remember one time I was out on the border, middle of the night. It was probably like 2 a.m. And I was literally the only human being for probably 10 miles in any direction, out on a dirt mountain road. If anything had happened, it would have taken 30, 45 plus minutes for anybody to get to me, including by helicopter. And I'm out there, and I get a call, and I'm asked to go check out a certain area, and I do, and I go down into this arroyo, and I'm walking along right on the border, this arroyo, and every hair on my body, my arms, back of my neck just stands up straight. And I get a very strong sense that I am not alone out there, that something or somebody is also there with the intent of doing harm to me. And so I turn around, I hightail it out of there and get to the high ground. And as I'm going up this arroyo, I can hear something or somebody walking parallel with me. Like I hear, leaves rustling and twigs crunching and stuff. So I get out of there as quick as I can, get up to the high ground and get some night vision equipment, and scan back into that area where I was before. There's this huge mountain lion sitting right on the border, just chilling, hanging out on the rocks, and that's exactly where I had been. And so this mountain lion was trying to decide whether or not I was going to be his midnight snack, and yeah, yeah, and that particular area was because I was down in the Arroyo, there was no radio signal, and so if anything had happened, I would have been SOL. But that was one of many stories I could tell. There was never I won't say there was never a dull day, but it was rare that there was a dull day out on the border.
Well, like, what was your second one that involved like drugs? I would say like either drug traffic or human trafficking, because human trafficking
Yeah.
has been the huge topic at this point. So
Yeah, I mean the second one was probably drug trafficking again. Without getting into too many details, like I was in a very very remote area. At that time, there were actually three of us that were in this area, um, working together. This was an area that was so remote that it was covered by Ford operating base, and so at the time I was deployed to Ford operating base. And there were a couple of other guys that were deployed to a different Ford operating base, and this was sort of the dead zone in between Ford operating bases. That was how remote it was. But I was out there. It was me and then a couple guys from this other Ford operating base, and we were just checking out the area because it was a known hotspot for drug trafficking. And sure enough, we came across a group of drug traffickers. Um, Surprised them so much so that they dropped their bundles of drugs. So usually these traffickers, when they're on the border, these are usually young guys. They like to use juveniles under the age of 18 because it's harder to prosecute those people. And so you got this group of like 16, 17-year-olds carrying 60, 70-pound packs of marijuana bundles. um, so for them to get away in the mountains and to avoid getting caught by us, they dropped the drugs and bolted back across the border, which was just a couple hundred yards away. Um, but as they did that, we very quickly realized that they had pretty heavy backup on the Mexican side. So it was the three of us. I think maybe one or two of us had a long arm, had like you know an AR. Um, but other than that, we just had our handguns. And three of us against a group of probably about 30 drug traffickers, including they had people up on the high ground in like a scout position, where it had been clear that they had been stationed there for a while. But they were on the high ground. They were in like a scout position on the Mexican side, and they also had uh, you know had you know long arms. They had some pretty powerful weapons capacities, and it was us against 30 of them, and things escalated. They started yelling insults at us, saying that they were going to do all kinds of things to our mothers and whatever else, whatever kind of insults you can imagine that somebody could shout in Spanish, they were shouting them. And it was clear that they knew that there were only three of us, and they didn't have a lot of, they were young. They didn't have a lot of respect um, for who they were interacting with. And so we made some pretty frantic calls out for assistance. Guys on the ground were barreling in trying to get to us to help us, but it was going to take them an hour plus to get to us. And eventually, they got a helicopter up in the air from El Paso, and the helicopter hauled out there as fast as they could, but it still took them a good probably 45 minutes to get to us. And during that whole 45 minutes, this situation had just been escalating and escalating. And we knew that at any time these guys could just pull the trigger, and that would be the end of the story. Uh, yeah, and it was this was in the same area that quite a few border patrol agents have lost their lives before. Um, the flip side of that is when they do kill a border patrol agent, that whole section of the border gets shut down, and so for an extended period of time, they bring in the heavy guns, and so it's bad for business. for somebody to get killed in the line of duty from their perspective as the cartels. So they try to control their people and prevent that from happening as much as possible. But it was a very bad situation. Anything could have happened. People have lost their lives before. It could have happened just as easily that day. Finally, the helicopter was coming, and thank goodness it was an old Vietnam era Huey. And so you could hear this thing coming from like 20 miles away, thump, 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 thump. And they could hear it too. And so the minute they heard that thump, 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 they knew what was coming, and they all hightailed it out of there. But that was probably the most intense, stressful 45 minutes of my life, waiting for that helicopter to show up. And I think we ended up recovering probably, it was like 600 or 700 pounds of drugs from that incident.
Wow.
Yeah.
Marcus, I'm on the edge of my seat. Wow. Well, let's pivot to another edge of your seat experience, and that is what we have seen in the past couple of years. This gets a little bit dark, but can you tell us what you started seeing around March of 2020 or even beforehand?
Yeah, so in March of 2020, I was in another hair-raising situation. Ended up through the course of my duties. There's a long story that I can't get into today. Someday I'll tell that story. But I was on the last flight out of Nigeria before they sealed the airspace in early 2020. And literally 3 minutes before midnight, our plane was able to take off. It had some mechanical issues and whatever. And at one point, the pilot got on and he was like, "Hey, just so everybody knows, we're dealing with mechanical issues. This plane may or may not make it off the ground. And if we don't, then we're going to deplane and everybody's stuck here." But we did make it up. 3 minutes before midnight, we got our wheels up. So last flight out of Nigeria, which is where I was stationed at the time. And there's so much more to that story. But I can't talk about it yet. So we go wheels up 3 minutes till midnight, and I ended up getting stuck in the U.S. For an extended period of time because there were no flights in or out, and at first it was a little bit scary. Nobody knew what was going on, but it pretty quickly became clear that whatever was going on wasn't justifying, the response, the reaction that we were seeing wasn't justified. They were locking down stores, small businesses, in a lot of places they were telling people that they were required, just like blanket wide curfews where people were required to stay in their homes. They weren't allowed to leave their homes. Not so much in the U.S., but certainly in other countries, including in Nigeria. And, shutting down places of worship, shutting down schools. And those are all actions that we're still, facing the repercussions today. Just the loss of education opportunity, the education opportunity cost during those couple of years, the harm that did to the next generation of Americans is immeasurable. So there was a lot of things that were going on that didn't make sense. The response wasn't in alignment with the actual the danger itself. And so to me, all along, I started very early on questioning why we were responding to this the way that we were so harshly. And not only that, but why were my fellow Americans okay with that? Okay with allowing their churches to be shut down, their pastors, their clerics the clergy to be arrested for keeping their places of worship open. You're talking about the most fundamental rights as an American, the rights of freedom of speech, of freedom of religion, of the right to peacefully assemble. These are rights that are enshrined in our Constitution as being so important that they are never to be violated. And yet you can just go down the list, and like almost every single right that we have was violated egregiously in the government's response. Um, and so that didn't sit well with me. But then, as we moved forward into 2021, um, you know, they started to come up with these. We started seeing more and more vaccine mandates in the private sector and in public sector governments around the world. They started requiring them for travel to certain countries. Um, and, I started, just the idea itself didn't sit well with me, but then I started looking into what went into the manufacturing, the development, the research that went into these vaccines, and realized very quickly that every single one of the products on the market, uh, call it a therapy, call it a vaccine, call it whatever you want to call it. That's another thing. They completely changed the definition of vaccine specifically for their COVID products. But
And for those who are not up to date with how it was changed, could you explain a little bit about how it was changed?
So I'm not a doctor. None of this is medical advice, but historically, a vaccine has been where they took some version of the actual virus, and then introduced that into your body in a way that produces a medical response from your body that develops antibodies without giving you giving you the full illness itself.
Right. To create immunity.
Yes, to create immunity, lasting immunity in most
That's right.
cases, if not all cases. And here that's not the case. I won't go into the details, but people, if they're interested, they can look it up.
And now the definition
not on
is,
Google, not on YouTube, because everything is censored, but
Yeah.
go on to.
well, now the definition has been changed to creating the antibody. It is not to create immunity. It is to create the antibody, and that is it. So immunity is completely left out of it, the definition now.
Because now they can't prove that they got immune after getting the shot.
But even the antibodies, sometimes the cure can be worse than the sickness, right?
Right.
And so, we've seen this. It's not the first time in history that this would have happened. Was it? I forget who it was that. There were even founding fathers who were killed by leeches because they removed too much blood from the body. They didn't know what they were doing. They were following the science at the time, but the way that you do science is that you challenge the assumptions, even the widely held assumptions, and learn something in the process, and improve the way that you you treat people.
Now,
if censorship had, if the level of censorship that we've seen over the last 2 years, if we saw that same censorship in history, we would still be using leeches as a normal course of treatment for a lot of disorders. And it's been proven through constructive dissent, through medical studies, that is often not the recommended course of treatment. But going back to the what I saw.
Well, let me ask before you get to that. Were you concerned about any shots, any vaccines before this?
I didn't know what I didn't know, and so as a diplomat, every time you travel to a new country, they give you a list of recommended shots, and I had always taken the entire list. I mean, just months before the COVID vaccine mandates rolled out, I took a series of rabies shots, which was, I think, 3 or 4 shots, because that was what had been recommended. I took the flu shot for the year. I took, I had taken every vaccination that had been recommended up to that point. But then, the COVID vaccine mandate came out, and as I started looking into it, I realized that there were aborted fetal cells used in every single product on the market, either in the research or the development or the manufacture itself of these products, without exception. And people will tell you, try to fact check that and say that it's not true because the shots themselves don't contain aborted fetal cells. There's a lot of different ways they try and manipulate the words to say that, well, that's not really what's going on. But the reality is, the fact is, and this is provable, every single COVID product that was on the market at the time, I haven't, I don't know about today, used aborted fetal cells in either the research, the development, the testing, or the manufacture. And I consider myself to be staunchly pro-life. I think that life and the respect for life is one of the most sacred beliefs that you can hold. And it's our obligation as humans to defend the most vulnerable forms of human life, to defend the defendless, to help the helpless. And I could not, in good conscience, based on my religious convictions, take a product that was the result of abortion, of killing another human being. And so, just based on my religious convictions, I couldn't take any of the COVID shots, and I realized very early on, as they started to roll out the mandates in September of 2021, that nobody was going to help us stand up for those beliefs, to help us be able to keep our jobs while also maintaining our religious beliefs. So the day that the mandates came out, September 9, 2021, I was actually up in DC. I was there for Russian language training. And that day I went to my member of Congress, and I told him, I said, look, we know, we're hearing rumors that these, at the time, Congress was shut down. It was close to the public. And so I was able to actually get an appointment and to go into the building. I had to be escorted by a staffer, but I was able to meet one-on-one with my actual congressman because they weren't allowing other visitors into the building. And I expressed my concerns, and I told him, look, we know that this is coming down. We don't know how soon, but we really could use Congress's help in pushing back on being forced to violate our religious convictions. And at the time, he's a member of the Republican Party, and at the time, the Republicans were in the minority in the House. And his answer was essentially that because they were in the minority, there was nothing that he or his party could do to help us, and that we just needed to hang on and wait until the next election cycle, and then they would, maybe be able to do something. I already knew that my union wasn't going to be helpful, because earlier in the summer, even when the White House press spokesperson was going out and publicly saying, we don't have the authority to do vaccine mandates, we're not going to do vaccine mandates, my union for Foreign Service members was proactively lobbying the White House to make COVID vaccination a prerequisite for being part of the workforce. And so my union was fighting for the mandates to be put into place, even before, even early on, when everybody else was saying there's no authority to do that. So I knew they weren't going to be any help. I knew Congress wasn't going to be any help. And then since then, we've seen every other oversight body who would usually stand up for the rights of the employee against an employer who was stepping out of bounds. They've categorically failed to provide any kind of support. And so seeing that, I recognized that if anything was going to be done, we would have to stand up and do it ourselves. And so that's exactly what we did. I linked up with Megan, and then, a few days later, we were matched up with Jim and his crew. And initially the thought was, okay, we have this small group. It's myself, some friends from the State Department, some of my former coworkers with Homeland Security. We're going to come together. We're going to pool our money. Yeah, it's going to be expensive. We're probably going to be, $20,000 or $30,000 in the hole per person. But we're going to pool our resources and see if we can hire a lawyer to help us fight this. And that very quickly grew to something much bigger. And so
I just had a question. You quickly went, how many weeks passed between the beginning of looking for other federal employees and right before that, the mandate? So from the mandate to the looking for other federal employees to join you. I mean, it was very quick. Yeah.
because by October we had at least 2,000 people with us. By November, I want to say that number was up to like 5,000. So you're talking about 2 months. 2 months, we went from 5 to 5,000, and that was despite being censored, shadow banned, deplatformed. Everywhere, every direction we turned, we were shut down. We were, flagged as dangerous misinformation, as violating community standards, whatever the allegations were, and we weren't even putting out anything, medical related, anything about the vaccines themselves. Essentially our position was, hey, these mandates violate our religious convictions. If you're in the same boat and you want to be part of a lawsuit, here's how to get in touch with us. Here's how to get in touch with the attorneys who are handling the case. That is essentially all that we were putting out. And even that, just saying, here is an opportunity to exercise your constitutional rights and to seek redress of your grievances through the courts. That in and of itself was considered dangerous misinformation and subjected us to being kicked off almost all the social media platforms. Our email provider even deplatformed us because apparently they were reading our emails, and they said that we were violating community standards in the content that we were sending.
And how did you find that out?
They told us, they emailed us. They said your account is immediately and irrevocably suspended because you're violating community standards. And they locked us out. They locked us out of our contact list. They locked us out of everything. We had no appeal. There was, and it set us back significantly because we had, been doing all of our communications on this platform, as far as engaging with people, trying to get them signed up for the lawsuits. And, overnight that they just flipped a switch and killed it. And so we had to quickly scramble and try and find another email provider that would work and fit our needs, and then try and piece together our contact information from various sources because they wouldn't even give us a copy of our contact list.
How is the email provider allowed to go through your emails?
I would assume it's probably somewhere in the fine print on the terms of service, but this is, a main. If I told you the name, everybody would know what company it is. It's probably the top email provider, if not one of the top three email services for businesses, for organizations in the U.S.
That's an interesting one because now YouTube allows you to talk about COVID, allows you to talk about election stuff. That's no longer.
They do now, but that's because
they do
of the
now,
public
yeah,
backlash
because
that they faced at the time. That was not the case,
Well,
and even still to this day, if you go to Facebook in particular, Facebook, Meta, whatever, and their companies like Instagram are the worst about this. And so still to this day, if you go to
I know.
our pages on there, it'll tell you, warning, this page has repeatedly posted, dangerous misinformation or whatever the phrase is that they use. But you go to our page on Instagram and a warning pops up saying, are you sure you want to engage with this page? That's censorship. And the fact that censorship early on was being carried out at the request of U.S. government officials, and was being used to suppress people's legal appeals against what they viewed as an abuse of authority and a violation of their constitutional rights. that should be warning to any American.
So
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Dennis.
go ahead. I was just I'm still shocked that an email service can actually do such a thing without any forewarning. Like they could suspend the account, but they shouldn't they shouldn't lock you out. As if like you're running a mob.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So
Um,
let's fast forward to, so you got a bunch of plaintiffs to be involved with the case with Boyd and Gray and Associates against.
We did, and I just want to touch on before we move forward, like that in and of itself was a huge process. We probably, between Megan and Jim and I and a couple of others, we probably called 50 different law firms before we would find one that would even talk to us. No attorney, even attorneys that have built their careers on standing up against government overreach, nobody wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They were scared. They were scared of the censorship. They were scared of how they would be treated in the media. They were scared of how this would affect their relationship with other clients. They were intimidated. They were bullied. They were coerced by public opinion and the abuse of the government bureaucracy into not standing up for what they knew was right. And it was hard. It was hard to find a law firm that was willing to take us on. We finally did. We finally got on board with, First Federal Practice Group filed a couple of lawsuits for us. One was in D.C. I want to say the other one was in Florida, focused on different pieces of the mandates. And then, ultimately it was the Boyd and Gray and Associates lawsuit filed in December that got us the injunction against the nationwide injunction against the mandates. And that was, and that injunction remains in place today. We won at the district court, we won at the circuit court, and now DOJ is refusing to let go. The administration won't let go. They won't cut their losses. And so now they're appealing it at the Supreme Court.
Thank you for all the work that you have done to make that possible. My husband is a recipient of all of that, and thank you for everything you went through. So right now we see you have seen retaliation on your end because of your part in all of this. Would you talk a little bit about that, what you have experienced recently?
Yeah, I have, even though I've enjoyed significant legal success in this whole process, it's come at a very high price. And my story is not unique. Across the leadership of the organization, and even within our membership, there are stories of people who have gone through situations even much worse than the situations that I've dealt with. People have been fired, have been harassed, have had their security clearances revoked. They've had lost their jobs, lost their houses. People have gone through a lot in standing up for what they believe in. And I'm no exception to that. Since our win in the Fifth Circuit, I've faced, really since the injunction went in place, I've been subjected to increasingly retaliatory actions by my employer, and that's ultimately culminated in them attempting to remove me from my position with the State Department. And that's a battle that continues to go on as we speak. And I don't know how it will turn out. I know that everything is in God's hands and will work out for the best. And if my future is not with the State Department, I know that there are plenty of other areas in which I can continue to make a difference. So I'm not concerned with my career as much as I am for standing up for what is right, and and not compromising my deeply held religious convictions, as well as the oath that I took to uphold the Constitution, to uphold those constitutional rights. I take that very seriously. But the unfortunate reality is many of our members have gone through the same thing. And so when you look across the board, the Office of Special Counsel, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Merit Systems Protection Board, offices of Inspector General, offices of Civil Rights, all of these bodies that are in place, congressional oversight, all of these bodies that are supposed to put the government, the executive branch, in check when they step out of bounds, when they overreach their power. None of those bodies have made any significant attempt to stand up for the employees that are going through discrimination as a result of the mandates, as a result of taking a stand regarding the mandates. And that's unfortunate because that's literally their job. That's literally their job. What's that?
Isn't that equity, equality, and inclusion?
Well, in the State Department, there was a solicitation that went out about a month ago to serve on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, a DEIA work group, and is like a mentorship program. And one of the top benefits of participating in this program was listed as you'll be in a group of like-minded people where you can discuss these issues. And so that's the problem, right? People don't, within the government, when people think of these things of diversity and equity and inclusion and everything else, they don't think of political diversity. They don't think of intellectual diversity, of diversity of thought. They want people who think just like them, but are different in some other aspect, whether it's religion or not even religion, but they look at all these other characteristics, but they don't take into consideration ideological diversity. And the reality is our country is ideologically diverse. We're roughly 50-50 Democrat and Republican, and a mix of a little bit of everything else in there. And our bureaucracy today does not reflect that. It's overwhelmingly, on one side of the political spectrum. And, that's one of the things that we hope to change as an organization is we feel that there needs to be ideological diversity in government service. And now, go ahead, Dennis.
It's funny you say that because like a couple of weeks ago, I had a discussion with a colleague of mine. We were talking about movies and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, yeah, I went and saw The Sound of Freedom. And like his whole demeanor changed. And I said, are you going to watch it? He's like, no. So why not? And he has 2 daughters. And I said, look, this thing is not political. It's not religious. This was all about human trafficking. I said, the only reason I went and watched it was not because, who made the movie and, what political side the guy was on. The movie was about human trafficking. I got 4 kids. And, that opened up my eyes. But I said, but that wasn't even the issue. I said, a guy I know who I used to co-host with, his sister's daughter got trafficked at age 14. I said, think about that. Forget about politics, forget about religion, forget about all that stuff. I said, you get a whole new animal that's happening in the U.S. that no one talks about. And if you remember, Marcus, I asked you earlier about, what was the second, thing that happened with the border trafficking. I was trying to see if you did see any trafficking, human trafficking, and I'm sure you have.
I have.
But this is all about experiences and what we go through, and who we deal with which is mostly governments.
And but you bring up a good point. That's the thing with human trafficking. It can happen anywhere at any time to anybody. And exactly. The human trafficking that I've witnessed happens not only at the border, it happens in small town USA. It happens in the little town of 3,000 people in Kansas, in Missouri, in the Midwest. Oh, yeah. People are like, oh, that doesn't happen here. It absolutely does.
Oh, it does. It does. People are blind. They don't understand that it actually happens.
People are blind. Whether willfully or just, evil is very good at hiding itself, right? And so a lot of people think that this This is something that's so outrageous, so atrocious that it could never happen in their community, but it does, and it is. And I would encourage anybody to educate themselves about the dangers of human trafficking, about the signs of human trafficking, because the government is not doing as much as it could. And I don't even necessarily think that at the end of the day, it's the government's. Yes, the government has a role to play in that, but it's everybody's responsibility to know what human trafficking is, and to be on the lookout for it within their communities. I'd
No,
rather a
absolutely. I
local
mean,
community take action through their police department, their sheriff's department, than just assume that the feds need to have all this power and need to get involved in something like that, because that is something that can be handled at the local level, at the state level.
sure, sure.
We don't necessarily need to pour. To give federal agencies more power to address it. The tools are there. People just need to wake up to the realities.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, it's a sad world, man. I mean, that's all it is. I mean, all this uh, government trying to control every aspect of your life. It's an issue. Um, the mandate was an issue. It's still. I mean, we're still not out of the woods because
Yeah.
they are challenging it in the federal court. Um,
The,
and
the, the Biden administration would love nothing more than to keep the mandates alive. I mean, that's literally their entire filing with the Supreme Court is,
obviously, but I mean,
it is trying to preserve that power. You give them an inch and they will never let go when it comes to turning over your rights. And the mandates are no exception to that. They, even though they say in their filing that, they're trying to dismiss it because they, and it should be dismissed because there's no reasonable expectation that they'll implement a new mandate in the future. And I'm sorry,
but
but
they're trying to bring it back
I have to
again.
call BS on that, because literally the whole point of continuing to fight it is so that they can preserve the power to implement
Of
another
course,
mandate in the
because
future.
they're trying to bring it back again. Kansas just had what a district go in full distance learning again because of COVID spread.
I'm not
Um,
following that.
yeah,
But
there's a school in Kansas, a district in Kansas
I'm
went
sure it's
on.
probably Kansas City.
Yeah, so they went on full distance learning last month.
Wow.
Wow. Was this
And
for
like
a particular time, and did it end just like the
this was
university
like
in
2 weeks ago, 3
Georgia?
weeks ago.
Have they ended it, or does it
I don't
continue?
know. I didn't look up on, but I mean, they pushed it. They pushed it and they implemented it. So I mean, that's enough for me to make my judgment call on that. So
No, Marcus, Feds for Medical Freedom has just been rebranded to Feds for Freedom because this is more than just COVID, what we have seen. So we've talked a lot about that today, but would you just talk a little bit more about the rebranding to Feds for Freedom and why you all chose to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we came to realize is that the mandates and all these other things that we're seeing, the weaponization of the government against the American people, all of these government abuses and overreaches, they're only symptoms of deeper underlying issues. And those deeper root causes are that our unelected bureaucracy doesn't value freedom. It's not accountable. It's not transparent in any way, shape, or form. And it's not reflective of the values of the Americans it serves, particularly when it comes to political diversity and ideological diversity, as we spoke about earlier. And so our goal in changing from Feds for Med Freedom to Feds for Freedom is simply the rebranding is simply a recognition of that fact, and of the fact that if we truly want to get to the heart of the mandates, to the heart of the weaponization of the government, all these other issues that we're dealing with, you can only do that by fundamentally reforming the bureaucracy itself, working through legal channels with stakeholders, with Congress, with other organizations, with the American people. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of throat tickle today. To change the government, to to get us back to a place where what we have is a system of government that is truly of the people, for the people, and by the people. Because right now, what we have is not that. What we have is a system that has been weaponized, that has been turned into a partisan tool to serve one side of the political spectrum. And those of us who disagree with that, who believe that is not in the best interest of the American people and are standing up, are being categorically pushed out in whatever way that they can. And they try to do this through the mandates. They're trying to do it now. In the process of standing up these mandates, they put into place new databases recording the religious objections against the mandates. And when they did that, they published it in the Federal Register, which is a public website, public document, and openly admitted that those databases would be used for the adjudication of security clearances. And so essentially what we have now is a database of people who, based on their religious belief, the government is going to go in and determine whether or not they're suitable for continued public service. And that, to me, is a violation of the Constitution, because in the Constitution it says very clearly that there shall be no, test of, I'm going to screw up the exact wording, but essentially it's there shall be no test of religion as a condition for holding a position of public trust or office. And those databases violate every piece of that. And so long story short, what we're seeing with the mandates, with all this other stuff, is just part of a broader effort to continue to make the government ranks less diverse politically, ideologically. And if we want to change that, if we want to make sure that the mandates, that what we went through over the last 2 years never happens again, the only way to do that is to address those root issues. Otherwise, every time, everywhere we turn, it doesn't matter if we win or lose, whether it's with the mandates or the weaponization of the Justice Department, or you can put a whole list out there. We're going to be playing whack-a-mole, dealing with these one-off issues that are just symptoms of the deeper problem. So our goal as an organization is to tackle that deeper problem. We're uniquely positioned to do so. We've got 9,000 members across every federal agency, every state in the U.S., many foreign countries, serving at military bases and embassies around the world. And we have a proven track record of, when we believe that something is wrong, immoral, violates our religious convictions, violates the Constitution, we are not afraid to risk everything, our careers, our livelihoods, our professional reputations, public censure, to stand up and say, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, let's take a different direction. And we're the only group of federal insiders in modern history that have come together and done that. And so, we're in a very unique position to make positive change, and I'm very optimistic that over the coming years we'll make those changes. It's not going to happen overnight. This is something that it's been generations in the making, and it's going to take at least a generation for us to undo that damage. But if we don't start now to take those actions that are needed to undo that damage, then the next generation is never going to know or enjoy the liberties and the privileges that you and I have today in the America that we live in.
And guys, if you guys just tuning into this, if you have not subscribed, you need to subscribe to the channel. You need to become a member of the Feds for Freedom. And we'll put the link of the website in the description for you guys. Become a member. We are a nonprofit organization, so your donations are always welcome for whatever you can afford. It helps everybody out. It's not just for shows. This actually goes towards all the legal battles that we have to put through. But definitely hit the like button. Definitely leave your comments down below. We need the comments in there so we could play with the algorithm of YouTube and all the social media platforms out there, so we could get little what's the word I'm looking for? It's it'll push the video out for more people to see. So it's exposure, I guess. So don't forget to do that, guys.
And before we end, but our last question for you, Marcus, is, given all that we've discussed today, is there one thing that you suggest that we, the American people, can do to combat this corruption?
Well, I mean, people have to get involved. Nothing changes in politics unless it's pushed, and the efforts that we're doing are no exception. We can only do what we are trying to do if other people are willing to stand up with us to provide financial support, to provide support in telling the story of what we're doing, because we have been so heavily shadow banned and censored and everything else. Our organization is 9,000 people, but we represent over 400,000 federal employees and contractors who, to some extent, did not comply with the mandates because of their personal beliefs and convictions. And so just getting our story out and bringing other people on board, people have to get involved. And it doesn't matter whether you're a federal worker or just a member of the public. Get involved politically. You may think that you as an individual can't make a difference, but you absolutely can. Be a precinct committeeman, serve as a poll watcher on election day. Write to your elected officials, call them, be active and participate in the civic process, because until we do that, and unless we do that, all across the board, whether it's at the local level, the state level, the federal level, within our workplaces, within our communities, if people are not involved and don't take ownership of the situation, nothing is ever going to change, or it's going to continue to change for the worse. And so that is my challenge to people. Do whatever you can, no matter how small you feel that it is, because it does make a difference. And there are there are millions of Americans out there who are in the same position as you and I, and they think, oh, I'm just one person. What sort of difference can I make? I didn't ask to be president of a 9,000 member organization. It was me and a couple of friends saying, hey, this is wrong. We're going to do something about it. Who else is in? And just like that, we had all the support. And, it just goes to show that, one person can make a difference. And people should never feel intimidated into not at least trying, because we owe it. We owe it not only to our generation to stand up for our rights, but also to the future generations. Because once you lose those, we're at a critical junction now. The only options left are either to fight for those rights or to accept that they're gone forever. There is no middle ground. You're either fighting or you're accepting that what we enjoy today will never be enjoyed by future generations. And for me, that's an easy choice. I'm going to pick fighting for freedom, fighting for liberty, fighting for the Constitution all day, every day.
I agree. Amen.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Marcus. You have not just held the line, but you have advanced the line. And we thank you very much for all that you have done. All right. Well, that's it for today. Please like, comment, and subscribe to all of our channels, and to stay connected with us as we continue these episodes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hold the line. Honor first.
Up next week, Marcus will interview Jim Erdman, Vice President of Feds for Freedom. Having worked as a CIA officer for years, Jim was encouraged to analyze data carefully and think critically. After the COVID chaos began, Jim submitted now widely known and accepted data to his higher-ups. He was actually reprimanded for not leading. Jim turned around, led others within his intelligence community to sue the government, and ended up co-founding and leading as vice president an organization of over 9,000 federal employees. We will hear Jim's thoughts on what reform looks like within our country and government. And here's a hint: it involves you, the American citizen. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe on the platform where you heard this podcast. Americans, hold on to and fight for your freedoms. We'll see you next week.